Hello. Good morning to everyone on the East Coast or in the United States, and good afternoon or evening if you happen to be in other parts of the world. Welcome to our webinar today titled Product and Brand Portfolio Balancing Customer Value Propositions and Pricing Strategies. My name is Sukumar, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer for OSG. With me speaking today is David Levine, who is Director of Client Services and Client Engagement at OSG. As we get into this webinar for the day, I wanted to also mention that our guests today are from life sciences and the healthcare industry. So much of what we talk about here stems from problems that have risen with our clients who speak about the importance of understanding how to balance the value propositions that they may have developed for a single brand or an entire portfolio from the pricing strategies that they begin to evolve for each one of them. Uh, Let us go to the next slide. To start with, we want to say a little bit about OSG, and we'll keep this very brief. OSG is looked at as a catalyst for customer-centric growth. Our work stems from bringing together both behavioral and cognitive data and analyzing that information to help understand how to change customer behaviors and how to get better engagement among these customers to increase growth and revenue. We have a very experienced and expert team with a global presence. We have delivered value to a large number of clients through our thought leadership, through our publications, our work for them across multiple verticals, including life sciences, consumer packaged goods, financial services, retail, and the energy sector. And our clients represent many of the marquee global 2000 companies. Let me start off with talking a little bit about more specifically about what does it mean to start to understand value propositions and how should companies really go through generating insights, particularly looking at and providing a continuous stream of insights for sustainable growth. We now show you a slide that speaks specifically to this process. This process starts off with mapping the customer journey, beginning to understand through customer immersions, specifically the identification of what jobs our customers, our clients' customers, are looking to do, what constraints they face with the current products, and specifically what benefits are they seeking in products that are not available today. This works both in the medical device industry as well as in the pharmaceutical industry, particularly where the customer happens to be a multifaceted patient, physician, payer environment as such. Through this, we begin to then move on to capturing a 360-degree understanding of the customers and begin to analyze that data, understanding not only what have customers done in the past, but also looking to where the opportunities and gaps appear in the future and how new innovations can be brought into the marketplace while at the same time quantifying these new emerging trends and beginning to understand how to shape these trends into effective new innovations and new products, while also looking at the size of the market and the customer's willingness to pay for these brands or products in the marketplace. At this point, as we go through this process, OSG has the ability to leverage a big data platform called Cavi, where we take it all the way from identifying these new emerging trends to beginning to shape them with new innovations, new products, understanding specifically what impact they would make on revenue and growth, and making this a continuous process to deliver success. In this entire stream, our clients often come with products or brands that may already be in the marketplace and oftentimes begin to ask questions around how to manage the products they have in their portfolio, how to better clarify the value propositions that they have to offer, and how best should they price the products that they offer today and keeping in mind that the portfolio needs to recognize that both a new innovation and the pricing or the pricing strategies around those new innovations need to be balanced very effectively. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, David Levine. He's going to take us through some of the problems that are faced and the approaches that we take to solving this, while I'll come back at the end to talk about a couple of case studies and some more comments on the technical aspects of how we do things. David?
Great. Thank you very much, Sukumar. And as Sukumar was describing and introduced, the topic for today is product and portfolio pricing strategies, which reflect a wide range of different problems and challenges that an individual client may be facing. So some of those key problems that we would be addressing when we talk about this topic is how much more would a customer be willing to pay for a product improvement, for a new innovation, a new service, etc. How much more does one brand, my brand in particular, command over another? How can I optimize product portfolio, both in terms of offering and in terms of pricing for the different offerings within a portfolio? How can I increase my market share? How can I increase profitability? How can I increase revenue? There's a lot of different topics within this that product and portfolio strategy addresses and really takes into consideration when setting a pricing strategy. Sukumar, any additional problems that you'd want to highlight here? Okay. So before we get into the meat of what we do to approach these problems, I think it's helpful to take a step back and think about the OSG philosophy on product. What are we talking about in terms of product and portfolio strategy? First, the product is not just a bundle of features. Product is a value proposition, is about a holistic experience. The product delivers benefits to a customer. The customer experiences the product and the aspects around that as well. And product innovations require a deep understanding of the customer job to be done and the unmet needs they face, the obstacles they face in attempting to do those jobs. And product portfolio and positioning interacts these different aspects, the experience, the product, the features, the benefits, the outcomes they're trying to achieve, interact with the pricing strategy. And we take an approach that takes all of these aspects into consideration. Another aspect we want to highlight before getting into the approach itself is separating the idea of pricing strategy from pricing policy. Those are two important considerations when we really think about both as we approach questions like this and try to solve these problems. When we think about pricing policy, that's how price is presented to a customer. So price could be about entire ownership of a product. It could be per procedure. It could be per dose. There could be lease arrangements or various other contractual obligations. And there's really a wide variety. And when we think about pricing strategy, we're really talking about the price points within a particular policy. When we go about research like this, when we're seeking to solve a problem, develop a pricing strategy, we do so with the policy in mind, or we'll also be testing alternative pricing policies in addition to pricing strategies. Often we can look at both at once because both are levers we have to better deliver value, better meet needs of customers, and better optimize a portfolio. Sukumar, anything to add on pricing policy, strategy, or product before we move on?
I think the clarification here is that while companies design good pricing strategies, they often fail on pricing policy because when the policy is all about execution. The policy is all about how we drive demand. The policy is all about how we demonstrate what value the company has to offer. And this becomes an extremely important element. A new term that is being used today for pricing policy is the business model. What is the right business model for the company? How do we use the right business model for the particular product or brand in order to disrupt the market. And so pricing policies, business models can disrupt go-to-markets for medical devices, can do the same for pharmaceuticals. And it is very important for us to keep that in mind as we think about these two elements, and they're very critical in balancing out against the value proposition and the value you have to offer to the marketplace.
That's great. And as we go through and we're talking more in the language of pricing strategy, keep in mind we often use the same approach to look both at the policy and the business model while looking at the pricing strategy as well, and consider both as levers. In talking about pricing strategy, there's two fundamental concepts that I think are worth refreshing. I'm sure everyone is familiar with these, but I think it's a helpful language to have as we're discussing it. And the first is the price elasticity of demand, which is just to say that the higher something is priced, the fewer people will buy it, or the less of it they will buy. And it's a simple calculation. You're looking at what the percent change in price is over the percent change in quantity to get to the idea that just how price impacts demand. So for elastic demand, if you increase price, demand will go down, people will buy less, fewer people will buy. Whereas in inelastic demand markets, products, you can have a lot more leeway with price and the quantity will remain steady. The other aspect we wanted to refresh on is the idea of the simple framework of value creation and capture. When we think about value creation and capture, the value creation is the willingness for a customer to pay for a product, service, innovation beyond what it costs to produce it. That is what the value creation is. And what price determines is how much of that value is captured by the manufacturer, by the provider of the offering, versus how much is captured by the customer. And that is a key consideration because what we think about as we go about a pricing strategy is the relationship between price and value, and how value and how much value is created in relationship to making sure that the customer is able to capture some of that value. So specifically, what we see as core to developing a pricing strategy is understanding the trade-off between price and value. And that helps to determine for any particular offering, product or service or other, how much value is being created by additional innovations, by additional features, things like that. And OSG, we bring two methodologies together for a very deep understanding of this price-value trade-off. The first you may be familiar with, that's choice-based conjoint, which replicates a purchase decision scenario. A respondent is presented with varying combinations of different potential products, combinations of features and price, and they're asked to choose an option. And based on this experiment, you're able to estimate to what extent each of these features is delivering value, is delivering monetary value for the respondent. AceMap is a proprietary trade-off methodology that is much more expansive than CBC and allows you to look at a much wider variety and number of benefits and features, as well as outcomes, including things that are more emotional, more intangible, that are difficult to put into CBC. So we can get a much broader, deeper look at what's driving choice with AceMap and a very precise understanding of how these aspects relate to price with CBC. And bringing these two things together is a very powerful approach. Sukumar, anything to add to that before we get into the type of output and analysis we'd be looking at?
Well, the one thing I would like to add here is that bringing together the two methodologies does something very interesting. On one hand, we understand using AceMap the balance of what is of value to each respondent in a survey, and through that process projecting into the universe. So it's critical that we understand what is the value, how much of value is it, how big is that value, and then through the choice-based conjoint exercise, we begin to understand more the demand trade-off, what features that are reflective of the value or the benefits from the ACE map are now going to impact real demand. So it's through that linkage that we are in a position to balance the value proposition, individually personalized for each respondent, and hence, therefore, to a broader audience, against the burden or the price that customers are willing to pay.
Great. Now, from this data collection, this process, this very rich source of data we can do all sorts of analysis to get a very detailed information to help inform and develop a pricing strategy. And one of the core approaches to that is to simulate the market. And what this allows you to do is to make estimations of given particular options within a market, both across one of our clients' portfolios, as well as with potential current and future competitors. We can see what choices they would make. And then by varying options within that, changing the prices of the different offerings, we can see how that would change their choice. So we can see where cannibalization would occur, where you are growing the pie generally, where you're moving from the lower price product to the higher price product. And by modeling these scenarios out and presenting all of these different scenarios, we can look at a metric we refer to as revenue index to say, given the share that you would likely get of the market going to each of your different products at each of these different price points, where are you best off from a revenue point of view? What is the revenue maximizing price point? And that's one metric we can look at. As we talked earlier, there's a lot of goals that our customers may have, our clients may have in terms of their strategy, but laying out these different options in these simulated scenarios, we can identify which different strategies and approaches yield the best results and have the impact that we're looking to have on the business.
So David, I'm going to add a few comments here to this very important slide that you put up here. Obviously, we've been talking about a few technical steps here on measurement, and then looking into calculation of willingness to pay, and then down into simulating the market when you have a single product or a single brand in your portfolio versus when you might have multiple products and multiple brands. So the same approach you have can be applied to that. My first comment for our listeners here today is, how do you balance price and value? So as you've seen, a conjoint approach is very meaningful to understand what are the value elements or benefits and how do they balance against the actual price a customer would be likely to pay for it. In the same way, what we end up doing mathematically is literally to take ratios between the change in value from an improvement to the change in value from a dollar being spent by a user or by a purchaser. So imagine that those two ratios in turn allow us to understand how much more is a customer willing to pay for increase in value due to improvements coming from an innovation or product development. Now, that math that I just talked about is not just as simple as taking ratios. There are a number of different factors that we have to take into account to build this willingness to pay calculation and make it correct. Among them includes, what is the customer's likelihood to purchase? What is the customer's likelihood to switch from a competitor product? And being able to bring all of these on this sort of an understanding allows us then to calculate the willingness to pay accurately. That willingness to pay gives us a measure of the maximum incremental value that the customer has. And you pointed out earlier, our pricing may actually be a tad bit lower than that, simply because you do want to make sure that your price is revenue maximizing. You're establishing a relationship between price and demand. You're also looking at to ensure that the price that you charge leaves some amount of value from the money with the customer. So you may be giving some value from the product consumption or from the drug consumption, but you're also leaving some value out of not taking off all of the money from that balances that particular value. So conceptually, theoretically, it's a very well written and well thought out technical and conceptual concept here, and is used extensively in designing pricing strategies. I want to take you through a case study here, specifically in two examples. One in the area of medical devices, where a client of ours has two products, and believe it or not, both products have very different value propositions and the value that they have to offer, and are under different brand names. However, the pricing and the way the pricing has been set up, more driven by manufacturing and unit costs, the pricing tended to be the same for both products. As the market matures and as competitors come in and competitors are greedy to impact and create better separation for their own products, this client of ours is torn between bringing a new innovation to the market and deciding how all of this portfolio will reside in the market with the right pricing. Going through the methodology that David just took us through, we were in a position to help them understand that one of the two brands in the marketplace had to be priced lower or had to be used as an entry product, because the value proposition it had and the value it offered to the customers was very differential, was used very differently, and therefore the newer product that was coming in as a replacement to the other product delivered so much more value would have to come in at a much higher price. Together, the entire portfolio would provide revenue and growth, and more importantly, what we did guide and demonstrate that by presenting a new business model, by presenting a new way to look at the price and present the price to the customer, our client was able to not only raise price on the new innovation, but also be in a position to get a much higher market share, and as a result, a higher revenue and a higher profitability. A fascinating case study when went into execution. A key element that we pointed out was, how do you communicate the value of the new innovation to the customer? What steps you need to do as you see existing customers convert to this new innovation, as you see new competitive customers convert to the new innovation, and some new entry customers look at leveraging the old product in the portfolio. Now, many times when I look at pricing and market access in a pharmaceutical setting, the questions that come up is, well, that's relevant for medical device in a hospital setting where the buyer happens to be the procurement or the purchasing department. How is it relevant in a situation where an insurance company or a national health system begins to operate out there? The underpinnings are very similar. Sometimes we often do not use an actual dollar price. We may use a tier status or a formulary access in a manner that reflects pricing and how we might create the right business model. But the approaches are very similar in pharmaceuticals as it is in medical devices, with some little tweaks in the methodology, with some little tweaks in understanding the balance between value and pricing. With that, we have one more case study, I think, which completely generated very different insights in the US and Europe. And I'm going to let David take us through that particular case study. David?
Sure, thank you. And if you look at what we see on the slide here, this is a good mock-up of something that looks like what we're talking about, where what we have here is a base product. What happens with this one product on the market, launched at several different price points? The question is, they will have their initial base product launch. Where do we price that? But then over the coming months, they're going to be following that with a better and a best model for that. So in developing the strategy, we can see what a revenue maximizing price point looks like with just the one product, with just the lowest end. We can then see what happens when we introduce a second product. How does that change the equation? Then we can put in our third product, and we can see where we're at each phase and work holistically to determine what reflects the best launch strategy. What we found when going through this data in this approach very closely in running through this analysis, we saw that the US and EU looked very different. And in particular, it wasn't just the pricing aspect, it was really the price policy aspect that differed, where the good, better, best model with this product type was very effective in the US. What we saw is that in Europe, if they were able to switch to a model that was more a good and better with potential add-on features at an incremental cost, at a per feature cost, you'd actually be much better off. That was a more appealing business model for that audience, and that they were actually willing to pay more for an individual feature included on the better version than they would be for a constellation of features, some of which are of value, others are not, in a best version. So using this approach, we could get alternate pricing strategies for a phased launch as was planned, but we could also identify where an alternative pricing policy might be of value and how that would look additionally. Any other thoughts, Sukumar?
No, that's great. Thank you, David. So what I understood you saying, the second case study was that in Europe, and a modular approach to adding features with a base product seemed to appeal a lot more to the customers, whereas in the US, the market was well segmented for you to offer 3 different value propositions at 3 different price points, and there was good clarity in the positioning of those individual brands that got better acceptance in the US. Is that a correct way to call the good, better, best that you had in the US versus the additional feature improvements in Europe?
That's exactly correct.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Great. And we just want to highlight one thing. We've really been focusing on the price-value trade-off and the methodologies we get to use that and how we go about the analysis there. And we see that as the core aspect of pricing strategy. But there are other components that we take into consideration, other methodologies that we use to get the full complete picture. So some of these look like competitive analysis. We may use approaches that look at what pricing communicates beyond just the price-value trade-off, things like that. So we look holistically about how value is created relative to the jobs and outcomes, et cetera, how price communicates, how price incorporates that. But the core of that we focused on was this price-value trade-off. Now we have time still if there are any questions, and certainly our contact information is here as well, and we're happy to answer any questions as they come to you if you feel free to reach out in the future.
And David, as we take any questions, I just want to reinforce what we heard today and our discussions around how to balance product and brand value propositions against pricing decisions. Our approach is all around empowering the customer, understanding their journey, capturing what their expectations are, both through the ACE map and the choice-based conjoint, and then creating personalized experience. The most important element in all of this is that pricing can be a very difficult decision. We have seen in many of our clients, salespeople are often a little averse to raising prices, changing prices on existing products, or even new improvements and innovations that come in. It's a change management exercise. It becomes an important element to bring everyone involved in managing not only the communication aspect and the conversation around the value proposition with the customer, but also those that go into direct sales and execution, so that the elements of the balance between price and value that the product or brand or the portfolio has to offer are very well communicated. David, time for a couple of questions, or maybe one question.
Great. I see. Can you leave us with some final thoughts on guiding principles to optimizing customer experience?
Definitely. So optimizing customer experience starts with understanding not only experience with the product or the brand, but the overall customer journey. And optimizing customer experience is especially more critical these days in healthcare and in drug or device manufacturing comes down to understanding every element of the patient or the physician's journey and how they interact and what benefits they seek, what elements drive their expectations. Whether those expectations are driven by how easy it is for them to gain information about your brand, about your customers, whether that expectation is driven by the specific quality of life measures or patient reported outcome measures on which a patient actually sees improvements from taking a particular drug um, or using a device. All of these make up that holistic experience. It's experience with the brand, experience with the product, experience with the entire during the entire journey at every stage. Knowing what the expectations are and addressing those expectations more effectively through personalized experiences can lead to the kind of engagement that we are looking for. Today, patients are willing and very much willing to feel empowered to provide you with information that can help drive this within the necessary boundaries of privacy and data security. We can talk more about that in a webinar later this year, or if there's a specific more details required, happy to send it out about how we do it, how we empower the customer or the patient or the physician to provide us with their expectations, and then being able to continuously improve that both in pharmaceuticals as well as in the medical device industry.
Great. Thank you very much, Sukumar. I think we are just about out of time. Please feel free to share any additional questions with us or reach out to either myself or Sukumar directly.
Thank you.